e-proctor or not to e-proctor? That is the question. Indeed, seems to be a question that is currently being hotly discussed at post-secondary institutions throughout the world. And the question is, why is that? Well, like so many issues today, the COVID-19 has played an important role, at least in aggravating the issue that, or the issues that are at stake here. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, universities and colleges have had to make a massive transition to remote or online instruction since March of last year. And many of you attending today are probably hearing something that you know and experienced very well yourselves, and that's why you're here. Especially the unexpected and rushed move of courses to an online environment that were designed to be delivered face-to-face has resulted in a spike of academic misconduct cases globally. And a number of factors seem to be at play, such as increased stress for students, confusion about where to get support, aggressive marketing by contract cheating providers, but most obviously the rise in cheating that we saw in the spring was a result of administering assessments that required proctoring in unproctored environments. And here's where software and services aimed at controlling the online environment, exam environment, to minimize, or as some websites of the providers claim, to prevent cheating, come into play, namely e-proctoring. And before we start the discussion, I'm just going to quickly go into, very quickly, what types of e-proctoring there is, what it's meant to do, and so on. So e-proctoring can roughly be divided into three categories: automated proctoring, live proctoring, so where real people sit and do the proctoring, and then some hybrid version between the two. Automated proctoring involves locking down the exam environment on computers, such as locking down the browsers, disabling the copying of materials, disabling opening of other applications, and so on. It also video records students writing the exams and supposedly flags suspicious behavior. That's the task. So talking, eye movements off the screen, leaving the exam environment, and so on. And then it saves those video recordings for later review. Depending on who has access to those videos, will do the reviewing of the flags. Live proctoring includes some or all of those features that I just mentioned. And then depending on the provider, it adds features such as personal and live assistance with launching exams, which can be quite stressful for students, multi-factor identity verification, practice sessions to familiarize students with the software, live verification of the exam environment, screen sharing with live proctors, flagging of suspicious behavior again, and then intervention by live proctors when someone is deemed to be behaving suspiciously, etc. Live proctoring in general comes at a significantly higher cost than automated proctoring. And hybrid versions, as the name suggests, combine automated features with live proctoring in different varieties. Some post-secondary institutions have rushed to adopt e-proctoring software without the usual vetting and testing to quickly respond to COVID-19 related spike in cheating last spring. Others are in the midst of this vetting and testing process, and yet others have decided altogether against the use of e-proctoring software. E-proctoring is a contentious issue. That's probably why you're here. Lawsuits have been filed by students against their institutions for the alleged invasion of their privacy. Lawsuits have been filed by e-proctoring companies against university employees for alleged copyright infringement. And tempers are running hot on campuses between those who support or want e-proctoring and those who are opposed to it for numerous and varying reasons, between those who believe it is the only way to protect the integrity of exams and degrees and ensure fair assessments in an online environment, and those who believe that adopting e-proctoring software in educational institutions amounts to complicity with an already unhinged surveillance capitalism that undermines privacy and other human rights. What better time then for the International Center for Academic Integrity to hold a discussion panel on the topic. We have 5 panelists today who will discuss the topic. Let me introduce them, and let me just briefly preface that by saying that all the panelists that are here today are not representing their institutions. in their comments. They are speaking on their own behalf. They're expressing their personal views and opinions. And I'll just go through, and if you just want to raise your hand when I'm introducing you. So we have Alicia Stewart. She goes by the pronouns she and her. She's the Vice President Academic of the Students Association of MacEwan University. And she's been actively promoting and supporting academic integrity at MacEwan University. Then we have Jake Binstein. Jake works as a software engineer in New Jersey. And at the end of December, he'll be receiving his MBA from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, which he attended online. So he's also a student. He wrote a popular article on trivially bypassing proctor software in 2015 and has continued to research the digital proctoring space since. That's actually why we contacted Jake, because of that article. Then we have Sarah Elaine Eaton. She also goes by the pronouns she and her. She's associate professor in the Workland School of Education and the educational leader in residence for academic integrity at the University of Calgary in Canada. She's the co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal for Educational Integrity. And she's also the co-editor and co-founder of the Canadian Perspectives on Academic Integrity Journal. And she's also published widely on academic integrity. And then we have Todd Denham. Todd Denham has been serving for the past 13 and a half years as the exams department supervisor for the Open Learning Division of Thompson Rivers University, Canada. And he's a proud member of the Canadian Academic Integrity Community. And then we have Jean, I got it wrong again, I know. Jean, okay, good. Jean Guerrero-Dib, director of the Center for Academic Integrity and Ethics at Universidad de Monterrey, Mexico. He co-organized the recent international conference on academic integrity at University of Monterrey, and there's lots of good recorded discussions there if you wanted to go presentations. And he's also co-chair of the International Center for Academic Integrity's Content Committee. Those are the introductions. We'll begin now by asking each panelist to briefly state their position on the title question. Then the panelists will discuss a series of questions that will touch on some of the substantial aspects of the controversy around e-proctoring. If there's time, we'll field some questions. So if you have questions, put them into the chat window. Some of the panelists have also mentioned that they're willing to answer questions that we don't get to by email later on. So if you want that, make sure you have some contact information on there and maybe to whom you're addressing the question. I apologize in advance if we don't get to all the questions. All right, now I'll take a break. Sarah, I'd like to start with you. What is your position on whether institutions should adopt e-proctoring software or not? And what do you see as the main issues?
Thank you, Paul, for allowing me to get us started with our discussion today. And I'd like to add that I'm joining you today from Treaty 7 territory, my home in Calgary, Alberta, which is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And I wanted to also start with an appreciation to you, Paul, to Jean, Amanda, and the Center for Academic Integrity for organizing this webinar and hosting us today. And to situate my preliminary commentary, I'm going to start by reflecting on the fundamental values of academic integrity that we know and that guide our work: courage, fairness, honesty, respect, responsibility, and trust. Just to reflect on that a little bit, I'm going to quote something from our document, our guiding document, the fundamental values of academic integrity on trust. Trust is often developed reciprocally. Being trustworthy and allowing oneself to trust others go hand in hand. Trust is a necessary foundation of academic work. Only with trust can we ground new inquiries in research of others and move forward with confidence. Trust enables us to collaborate, to share information and circulate new ideas freely, without fear, without our reputations diminished. Trust is essential so that those outside academic communities can believe in the value and meaning of scholarly research, teaching, and degrees. In my opinion, e-proctoring and surveillance technology stand in direct opposition to the value of trust that we hold as academic integrity experts and advocates in our work. And I think that it's important to understand our discussions based on these fundamental values and ask ourselves, if we're using technology, such as surveillance technology and e-proctoring, how are we actually trusting our students? And how are we trusting ourselves to give assessments that truly reflect that students are learning? I'll end there and pass the microphone.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I'll directly pass it on to Todd. Todd, what is your position and on e-proctoring, and what do you see as the main issues? I think you're muted, Todd.
No, I'm not.
Oh, now it's good. Sorry, maybe my...
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the other panelists who are joining us here today. I'll just start by saying I think this is a very potential hot button topic right now. And I'm here because I think open discussion on topics like that are necessary. I think if we all just go into our silos and we don't discuss things like this, I think resolutions aren't possible without open discussion. So that being said, I will say that I am in favor of e-proctoring as a tool. I think any tool can be useful if it's used properly. The key, though, is using it properly. I see e-proctoring as an extension of what we do when we invigilate or we proctor exams in person. We don't put the students in a room and give them the exam and say, go at it. We have somebody there watching them. So how do you do that in an online environment? I think that e-proctoring is a tool that can be used to do that. I do emphasize, though, it must be used properly. So when doing that, there is a level of trust that you have to have of the student, but you also have to be able to supervise the taking of that exam. So how do you balance those two? I think e-proctoring is a tool that can be used to do that, but again, I stress it must be done properly and in a non-invasive manner.
Thanks, Todd. Jake, over to you. What is your position on e-proctoring, and what are the main issues?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Paul. My position is that, as Sarah mentioned, trust is extremely important. And furthermore, I do not believe that e-proctoring software works at a technical level. I think the technology just is not there yet. And the trade-offs that we make in terms of invasive watching of webcams, taking over of computers, shutting down all background processes, all things that we would consider to be a computer virus if it were not, provided and indeed required by the university, are all things that we accept because we say, well, this is what is needed in order to ensure the academic integrity of students. And at the same time, as Paul mentioned, I wrote an article that it can be very trivially bypassed. In this forum, I'm not going to be giving exact instructions on how to bypass something, but I just wanted to point out that right now, maybe this is a closed book exam, maybe you're looking at me through my webcam, maybe my whole computer is taken over, but just out of the view of the webcam, I have plenty of notes on what to take. So even though I'm giving up so much of my privacy, I've just defeated it. You can't see my keyboard, you can't see anyone behind my screen right now. And if a student really wanted to cheat, even with the expensive and invasive software, I believe they still could. And so I think that there has to be a change in the way that we educate, where we have to recognize that exams today are not like they were, and trying to make a one-to-one comparison between what we had in classrooms and what we have online just is not going to work with the software that we have today.
Thanks very much, Jake. Alicia, on to you. What is your position on e-proctoring, and what do you see as the main issues?
Thank you, Paul. And I'm joining you all from Treaty 6 territory here in Edmonton. I figured I should mention that as well. And thank you for having me join this lovely panel today. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we have. when it comes to a student perspective, and from students I've heard around Alberta, in particular at my institution at MacEwan, as a student representative, I think e-proctoring has become an interesting and complicated issue, as we've all mentioned here today. But I think it's also, but I'm very thankful that MacEwan has taken more time to consider the pros and cons in addressing e-proctoring compared to some institutions who did rush into it, or those who have maybe been using it for longer. There are many different reasons people might have been using it. But a lot of the issues that we come across is around potential racial discrimination, around skin color that is detected, also the movements that are detected that could come across on protected grounds around accessibility, and for students who need accommodations or who have disability. And there's also the maybe more obviously is the privacy issue, and students not always feeling secure or like they would have that trust to have their computers potentially taken over or be observed while they're doing an exam in such a intimate matter, I would say. And so that's always been at the back of my mind when we're having these conversations around exploring different technologies, such as other e-proctoring tools. I think there can be some benefits to some of those tools, but it has to be through careful consideration and customization. And whether that's worth the price tag and the current levels of technology, I think that's to be determined or still up for exploration.
Thanks very much, Alicia. John, that leaves you to give us your position statement on e-proctoring and what you think the main issues are.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for all your hard work. Well, I think it all comes to a cost analysis test. We are to them, after a long deliberation period, we have concluded that the decision of to e-proctor or not to e-proctor depends on the particular circumstances of every institution and even subject or instructor. We are aware that the radical solution to academic dishonesty passes through a solid culture of academic integrity based in two fundamental pillars, which is one, love for learning, and second, authentic assessment. But building it takes time and sustained effort. So while we are working on it, we have decided that it may be convenient to e-proctor in specific cases, such as when it's particularly difficult to develop personalized assessment instruments, or when there are applications that solve problems with unique correct answers, even with procedures such as what happens with maths, physics, chemistry, and biology. And also when there are higher stakes at play with high impact evaluations. So basically, our answer is, or my answer is that it depends on the situation. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Jean. Okay, so that concludes that position statement round. Let's move on to the first question. And the first question I wanted to ask are, what are the benefits of using e-proctoring software? And Todd, let's start with you.
Well, the benefits of using e-proctoring software, I will say, I don't see a whole lot of benefit in using it just on its own. I think it needs to be an accompanying tool for a live invigilator or a live proctor. I think we need the live person there who can assess certain situations that a tool on its own, or artificial intelligence, however you want to refer to it, cannot do. I think the personal touch with e-proctoring is necessary, just as in a live situation, you would have an invigilator or a proctor there who can assess the situation and deal with things that arise. In the same way, I think the e-proctoring tool could assist a live proctor, but I think the benefits lie in it being an assistant to the live proctor and not monitoring the student all on its own.
Thanks, Todd. John, can I move on to you and ask that same question? What do you think are the benefits?
Well, I think I can sum up the benefits into the following three. First, it protects academic quality, which is equal to learning, and it's also traduced into real grades. I didn't came up with lots of research results, but what I have found is that e-proctored students have statistically significant lower grades than non-proctored students, which is something that is interesting. Second, it promotes an ethical behavior. Although I haven't found research about this, it may be logical that proctoring will diminish the opportunities to cheat or will increase the chances to detect academic dishonesty acts. And three, finally, it provides a level field for all students and gives a sense of justice. We have asked our students and they acknowledge, they say they wouldn't like to be proctored, but then the same students acknowledge that we are, at least in our context in Mexico, we are still not ready not to be proctored. And therefore, they say it's still needed. We have heard about other institutions such as Davidson College, where during exams period, students can take when and wherever they like because their exams, because the academic integrity culture is so strong that that they will not cheat, or most of them will not cheat. So I think that type of scenario will be our aspiration back down here in Mexico. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Jan. So the next question is going to be what the obstacles are, but are there any, do any of the others want to speak directly to either what they've just heard from Todd or Jan, or add to the benefits? Alicia, go ahead.
Thank you. I think there are some good points brought up, and some of the ones I like to think, or that I started to think a bit more about as we're looking into potential e-proctoring software, is around, and I'm familiar with the amount of time that, or I sympathize with the amount of time that it can sometimes take for instructors to investigate a potential academic misconduct or academic violation, or misconduct violation, sorry. And I'm wondering too that time analysis, if everything was to be recorded, if there is potentially suspicious answers or activity, that then they can look that over, they can have the data available instead of having to go through different online tutoring sites that could, or potential contract cheating sites and stuff like that. And that can take a lot of time from instructors, and maybe them actually putting it into their work as well. The other part I do see as a potential benefit is students who are concerned that other students might be cheating if there is no proctor, and whether that is fair for others who are getting certain grades or not. So I think there are a few benefits for sure to be aware of, but again, is it a one size fits all? No, I don't think so. And I think it definitely needs to be considered, as I mentioned before. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. Anybody else want to jump in on the benefits side before we move on to the next question? Okay, then, Jake, I wanted to pose you the question, what are the obstacles and risks to consider before rolling out e-proctoring?
Sure, thank you, Paul. So I want to speak quickly about these obstacles and risks, and I think that there are many, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to sort of breeze through these. If there are any questions, please feel free. I'm trying to answer questions via texting during the Q&A section of Zoom. But again, I'm just going to breeze through these. In terms of risk, I think that there is a major risk in saying that if we don't fully trust students and we enable the software, and the software says that there was no cheating, you know, it didn't come up with anything, then there was no cheating. I think that there are a number of ways that you can cheat using the software, even, you know, trivially. Like I said, I could have a sticky note on my screen right now. I could be using notes that are just out of view. It's very, very difficult to really determine that there is no cheating. And so false negatives are a big issue. False positives are also a big issue, which is that if the algorithms or you know, the artificial intelligence detects that your eyes are looking in a different direction, or that you know, it says that you were cheating, there's some background noise. You know, there are then two options. Is the professor going to go through and say, yes, I'm going to make a formal complaint against the student, I'm going to accuse them of cheating, and then it becomes up to the student to prove a negative, that there really was no cheating, and whatever it determined, it was an overeager algorithm? Or alternatively, the teacher can choose to ignore that sort of pop-up, and it'll slowly have the psychological effect that you ignore the software. Yeah, it always comes up with a dozen things that, that a student did wrong, but I'm just going to hit ignore on all of those. It's not really necessary. And so in all of those cases, there's a very slim number of cases where it A, finds cheating, and B, there really is cheating. The majority of other cases could be problematic. But in addition, I just want to go through really quickly a couple obstacles that I thought of. Specifically, that there are requirements which are now basically requirements for getting a degree that are requirements for using this software. So one requirement that I just ran into when setting this up, I don't know if you can see, if I move my eyes around, you can see the lights in the room in my eyes. A number of, because of my glasses, a number of the software packages will track your eyes to make sure that you're looking at the screen. But if I position my eyes just right, you can't see my pupils at all. And what happens then? Am I allowed to continue taking the exam? Do I get marked as cheating? Can I trust that a teacher will simply ignore it? I'm not really sure. Furthermore, someone mentioned as well that if it's too dark in the room and the software can't recognize my face because there's not enough contrast between my face and the wall behind me, it may not let me take the exam because it can't recognize someone sitting there. And we've seen news stories already that students with darker skin complexions have a lot of trouble maintaining the contrast between themselves and the wall behind them in a dark room. And one example of a dark room where students go regularly is a library. If you don't have control over the lighting, you really can't take an exam in a library anymore. And other problems with the library might be that, libraries are supposed to be quiet, but not necessarily silent. So if the software says that it can detect conversations or even phone calls near you, what if there is a phone call near you and it just has nothing to do with you? Am I going to get accused of cheating or not? I'm not sure. What happens if someone walks behind me taking an exam and you can see two faces in the screen, and the facial recognition software gives the professor a pop-up? Can I trust that the professor will know that that person is a stranger to me? Maybe they are cheating with me. The software doesn't necessarily determine the relationship between the people or whether or not they, passed me a note or something like that. Other issues are that in some cases, because there is such limitation of the view of the webcam, some sources require you, or some software requires you to have multiple devices, looking at your screen. So you would have to set up another device behind you facing your laptop to get a 360-degree view of the room. Not everybody has two devices. Not everybody has an internet connection capable of doing multiple video screens. And especially if you're taking it in a library or a cafe, there's not going to be a place to set that up. So I think that there are a number of risks in terms of really trusting the software, and a number of obstacles that are thrown in front of students to be able to actively use the software. Maybe they don't have a room to themselves for 2 hours with high-speed internet connection and multiple devices, and these are now requirements for higher education.
Thanks very much, Jake. So I'll open this up now. Does anybody else want to talk about either the obstacles that they see or respond directly to what they heard from Jake? Who would like to respond? Go ahead, Sarah.
Both Jake and Alicia have pointed out the equity and diversity issues that are problematic with e-proctoring software. These are not trivial issues, especially not during this time when we have social movements such as Black Lives Matter. Heightened awareness around the need to engage in anti-discrimination discourse on our campuses is more important now than ever. And so, yes, student skin color is a real factor in this, and not just skin color, but it's how the algorithms systematically and systemically discriminate against certain kinds of students. That is the kind of discrimination that we want to not have on our campuses and in our learning organizations. Another equity issue is around finances. Not all students can afford a webcam, and not all students can afford a high-speed internet connection. I work in an urban area with a very good, generally, internet connection, but lots of our students are in rural and remote areas where that kind of connection isn't even available to them. So this kind of software privileges the privileged.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I think I'm going to let Alicia go first, and then Jake, if that's okay. Go ahead, Alicia.
Thank you. I think a lot of the obstacles are already mentioned, but some of the ones I definitely want to enforce is the ones around the security and the privacy that students have. It is different than having an instructor in the room that can supervise or check the area, but it's not having someone directly breathing down your neck or staring directly at you, right? The intimate nature of potentially a webcam and the accessibility too of those services. I have friends who do not have a webcam or do not have always a stable internet connection either. And sometimes even myself, sometimes if someone in another room is using it and the bandwidth is starting to be used, I'm not a huge tech person, so I don't really know how all that works. But when the tech issues can come up, and if there's multiple barriers to even starting an exam, it just increases anxiety. And it increases some of those concerns that students have when they're already in a potentially stressful situation with doing an exam. So if you're going to increase the level of stress, how is it going to impact their performance on those exams? For students like myself, I will typically look around sometimes in my area just because I'm thinking, or students who do have disabilities or other needs, like if they have to get up or goodness gracious, they have to answer the door or something happens, are they going to get flagged? And then also, how are they going to be interfaced with their instructor if they do have concerns? Sometimes those will all need to be considered by the instructor, because sometimes if it's all lockdown browser, but if they go to try to email their prof about a concern that they're having, if they're not allowed to do that, how are they supposed to get the help that they need? This really depends on the technology that's being used and the ability and other things to consider as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. Jake, you had a comment.
Yeah, just building off of what other people are saying, and again, really quickly, I've already taken up my time, but one of the issues with bandwidth is that there are so many people at home today because of COVID, that if you are taking an exam and someone else is working from home, and then you have multiple students, children even, who are doing remote learning, that's all eating up your bandwidth, and you can't necessarily guarantee it, especially non-techies. Another issue is that the algorithms are effectively creating a baseline or an average for how students take an exam, or even your specific exam. And so there have been reports of people saying things like, I was reported for not using the backspace key as often as everyone else uses it. And what that's supposed to test is if you are writing an essay live, you've just seen the short answer question for the first time and you're starting to write, you're most likely going to write something and then, backspace it and start again a little bit. But if you're the type of person who thinks first and then writes it down, you'll hit the backspace key fewer times. That's one of a number of things that it can track that'll say this person is doing something anomalous. And anybody who learns differently is very likely to reach these kinds of anomalies. I personally, when I take exams, I read the questions out loud to myself. I learn better when I hear it, especially when I read it. At any time that I'm speaking, that could come up as, having a conversation with someone. And in truth, I could be reading that out loud to someone standing just behind my computer, who then says, holds up a number of fingers for if it's A, B, C, or D, because they've been looking it up. That is not what I do, but it very well could be. And I'm not sure that the software can really stop me.
Thanks, Jake. I just have to, Todd, I'll get to you. Somebody just in the comments wrote that they sing the questions. I wanted to, that light note. Todd, go ahead, please.
I'm not going to disagree with my colleagues on the panel that there definitely are obstacles to using e-proctoring. But again, I have to emphasize the real live person is a necessary component. You cannot rely completely on the software. It can only be a tool that's used by the live proctor. I would never recommend that the tool itself be the proctor. You need a live person who can adjust to those things. If the person is singing out the questions because that's the way that helps them do their exam, then a live person can make that assessment, just as in the same way a live person would make that assessment in a room if a student was talking to themselves or singing out. You need the live factor. You can't rely solely on the algorithms of the tool, because a tool is only as good as its designer or how it's designed. It cannot replace a real live person. So there are obstacles to just using the tool. Yes, there are. But you have to involve the real live person. And another thing I would stress, that if you do choose to use an e-proctoring service, that you as the institution set the parameters. You don't allow the e-proctoring company to decide what is cheating and what isn't cheating. You set the parameters, you make the decision, not the e-proctoring service.
Thanks, Todd. Anybody else want to comment on the obstacles or respond to anything you've heard so far? Okay, then let's move on to the next question. So we heard the pros and cons here. What alternatives are there to e-proctoring? And do they apply in all situations and to all fields of study? And I wanted to start with Sarah on this one.
Thanks, Paul. I'll start off by declaring my positionality. So I come from a humanities and social sciences background where assessments look very different than they do, for example, in the STEM fields. And so that's the position that I come from. Having talked with my colleagues at my own university and beyond, it seems like this is a real pain point for some of my colleagues in the STEM fields, where classes are often very large, hundreds or even thousands of students taking a particular course. And so they come to us asking questions like, how can I have something other than a multiple choice exam when I have 2,000 students in my class? And I don't have a good answer for that. I think it's really important to engage people with disciplinary expertise, subject matter expertise in these conversations, because my colleagues in the STEM fields that I talk with are hungry for alternatives that will actually work for them when the number of students that they have is almost overwhelming. For smaller classes, the ones I teach, I use a variety of different kinds of assessment types. This past summer, I incorporated more oral exams into my courses than I ever had before. Open book exams, creative solutions, doing podcasts, infographics. There are lots of kinds of alternative assessments out there, but it really depends on the kind of course and the discipline.
Thanks, Sarah. You actually spoke exactly to a side conversation that's going on in the chat right now, so that was good. Anybody else want to talk or comment on alternatives to e-proctoring? Yes, Jake, please go ahead.
I personally would prefer, I mentioned this in the Q&A, but I personally would prefer as a student taking a course that tests me in ways that are not straight exams. As Sarah mentioned, there are a number of other ways to test students. There are essays, there are in-person, just speaking with the teacher directly, trying to describe your position. I think that exams are very much an in-person and analog style method of testing. And I think that there are a number of ways that you can innovate using the internet. Even just having a Zoom call with a professor might test my knowledge better than multiple choice. In addition, I also want to point out, in terms of academic integrity, we really do trust students in many other forms of assessment. For example, if I'm assigned an essay, and I'm assigned an essay, I write it on my own and I hand it in. Maybe I paid someone to write that essay for me. We really don't know in any way except for the exams, which are done live and in sort of invasive manner. We do trust students in a number of other aspects. We're just talking about exams now when we want to, make sure that we have a clear view of the students, which is interesting because we, at some level, we are trusting students regardless.
Thanks, Jake. Anybody else like to comment on? Yeah, Alicia, please go ahead. And then, Jean. Okay, and then John.
Am I first here or Jean? Okay, awesome. Just checking there. Thank you. I think there definitely are more alternatives. I know UDL, so Universal Design for Learning, is becoming a much more popular theme, which rightfully so, especially to address those, again, who need other accommodations and just making education more accessible for students. And to Jake's point, those are the classes that I've excelled and enjoyed the most, where I've actually gotten time to reflect and actually come up with my own perspectives and reflections to answer the questions that are getting more at those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy and not just route memorization. And I think to address some of those points, I am in a Bachelor of Science, so I have taken introductory math and science courses. So I understand the need for potentially some courses that only have so many questions or formulas and so many ways that they can rework those to adjudicate students' answers and test their knowledge. And I think there could be a place for some of these technologies, where that be maybe instead lockdown browsers or other ones rather than those video proctoring models. Students will find ways to get around it, but if there are a few other extra layers or other things to consider that have a little bit more tracking of those kinds of things, maybe that could be an option. But I think looking more at maybe it goes down to restructuring some of our institutions in the way that we view pedagogy and learning, where maybe there should be more support or more funding towards schools so that students don't have such large classes, or that instructors don't have such large classes that it's too overwhelming for them to mark students effectively and judge their understanding of material, right? But that's definitely a long-term kind of goal in conversation, and I don't mean to discredit larger institutions, but it is something to consider. What is the value of the education that we're providing and of our assessments? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alicia. Excellent points. John, you wanted to mention something as well.
Oh, just to point out what Todd said about that e-proctoring software cannot be used like in a standalone way. You know, we need always to have an instructor or a person behind the software just to review what happened with those alerts that typically the software gives us, and also that the alternative which I stated in my opening point is that is obviously assessment. Yeah, and it's not only about the design of the assessment specifically, but also probably it will it claims that we need to speak about education itself, you know, like our strategy of assessment, just as Alicia said, you know, like probably we are stuck in a way to teach and assess knowledge that must be reviewed as a whole.
Thanks, Jan. Todd, please go ahead.
I totally agree with my colleagues on the panel. Alternate forms of assessment are necessary, but perhaps I misunderstood the question. My understanding of the question is, what are the alternatives to e-proctoring? And yes, changing the assessments completely so that they don't need to be proctored obviously is an alternative, but in the current world of academia, many courses are designed to have final exams. So I approach the question as, what are the alternative for those courses that have final exams? Of course, you could remove the final exam from the course, and then e-proctoring doesn't become an issue, because if you don't have a final exam, you don't need to proctor it. But what are the alternatives for the courses where they do have a final exam, which are many of our courses currently exist? If we have a final exam, and if we fundamentally agree that that final exam then needs to be proctored, whether it's in a live classroom, which we don't have the opportunity to do right now, then what are the alternatives? Well, e-proctoring is one of those alternatives that still allows us to proctor that exam in a non-live environment. So it's a tool. It's an available tool that can be used. But again, I emphasize, it cannot be used on its own. You need to have a live proctor. And when I say a live person, I don't just mean a live person reviewing the video after the fact. I mean a live person actually doing the proctoring and using the tool to assist them, but not relying solely on the tool to do the proctoring itself.
Thanks, Todd. We have time for one more response to this, and Sarah indicated that she wanted to say something.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'd like to add on to what Todd said. And Todd and I have had many conversations about e-proctoring over the past several months. And I think you bring up an excellent point, Todd. And we talked about how at your university before the pandemic, students had a choice of whether they wanted to use e-proctoring or whether they wanted to come to campus or go to a testing center. Those options have been removed from students. And to your point, Todd, I wonder if there's an opportunity for conversations about how and if students might be accommodated by going back to their campuses or to a testing center in a socially distant way that might be safe if campuses are open, and to give them back their agency and their choice. The fact that choice has been taken away from students during the pandemic is a real problem. And I've used this analogy before. It's not perfect, but I hope that it serves to convey my point that, during the pandemic, e-proctoring has been to higher education what hydroxychloroquine has been to the virus. Schools have run to it, thinking that it's an automatic antidote to a complex problem, and it's not. It's going to take many of us to solve the issues that are happening, and e-proctoring is not the silver bullet that many schools ran to thinking it was.
A quick comment, Todd.
I just say I will agree with Sarah. I think choice is a very important thing that we need to offer students. And I had the advantage of, we investigated e-proctoring well before COVID hit. And Sarah's right, we did give our students a choice, and we are still trying to give our students a choice when a choice exists. In some cases, other than waiting, e-proctoring is the only choice. But if a student chooses to wait, then why not let them wait until another alternative becomes available?
Thanks, Todd. And with that, actually, you provided the perfect segue. We're going to ask the students now to speak specifically to e-proctoring, or from a student's perspective. And I'll start with Alicia, and then I'll move it on to Jake, because Jake is still a student for a month and a half, and then we'll open it up. So Alicia, go ahead.
Thank you. I think I've talked a lot about what the student perspective might be on these things. So, and whether it be my introductory statement or addressing some of the questions that have kind of come up. And I think it still remains a complex issue. And it still remains, I think Todd has mentioned one of the biggest things around the use of e-proctoring, which is that it's not to be used on its own. It's to be used in consultation with the university, with the students, and with having someone reviewing it, right? Not just going exactly off of what these red flags were noticed, this person is cheating automatically, right? No, that's got to use some kind of consultation or some kind of reviewing of this by an actual person at an institution. And I think there is value to that, especially in some of this STEM courses and for larger classes. I can definitely see the usage. One thing I'd like to mention around alternatives, in some institutions that I've used, they had a working group at the institution that then certain courses would have to, and instructors would have to apply to see if they could use e-proctoring. So it was a vetted solution, and it's not a one size fits all, but it's instructors who think that there could be use in their courses to explore that. There can also be other considerations if other offices at an institution to address accessibility and accommodations and create more custom options for students, whether it be what they choose to track, what they don't choose to track, and having that from not just a personal, but as mentioned, from an institutional standpoint of what they're willing to choose in those kinds of things and what kinds of things they want to look at. I still think the privacy and the security of that information, if you're being recorded in your room, maybe I don't want someone to see that my bed isn't made on the side there or something like that, or what posters I have on my wall. So that's still a huge issue in people's invasion of privacy and the trust that they have with their instructors, and who gets to see what, especially in a pandemic when already stress is high and tensions are rising with cases. But yeah, that's a little bit of a summary of some of the points that we mentioned. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Jake, what would you add as a student? From a student.
I'm actually taking a final exam that is e-proctored in about 1 hour after this finishes. So a little bit ironic that I'm talking about the subject right now. But I wanted to, before I start, I just wanted to make a quick point to Alicia, who mentioned posters on her wall. if the posters on your wall have faces on them, you can get in trouble for having multiple people in your stream, because the facial recognition can detect, multiple faces in order to make sure that you don't have like 4 people looking at your screen and trying to take your exam. So that can actually also be a problem in multiple ways, not just the embarrassment about the poster, but also because you can be banned from taking the exam for not having just one person taking it. But that being said, I wanted to provide a perspective of a student, not myself, but I wanted to give a hypothetical student who's probably on the extreme, but some or all of this may be applicable to many students, especially undergraduate students. This hypothetical student does not care about academic honesty. Probably, anathema to this particular crowd, but, for them, when you sign an academic pledge, it may just be, the terms of service that you have to sign off on before you start school. And that you can't cheat, that it would devalue your education, you wouldn't really learn anything. You also know that if everyone cheats, it would devalue the entire university. That being said, you Google things a dozen times a day or more. If you don't know the lyrics to a song, if you want to see if a celebrity is still alive, you're just constantly Googling things. And then within maybe a 1 or 2 hour block of your entire life, for that hour, you can't Google things. And for those students who say, yeah, but what if I could get away with Googling it? What if just outside of the view of the camera, I have my phone and could Google it and get away with it? I'm not so sure that everyone takes that as a moral question. They should. And, I've been to Rutgers in undergrad and NJIT as grad school, and neither of them had any classes on academic integrity. I signed one piece of paper and that was it. And in not caring about this, I also find that many of my classes that I've taken and many that other students have taken end up basically being copied and pasted online classes from previous semesters. So the exams are exactly the same. The questions on the exam are from the textbook publishers. And if you were to Google the exact text of any of the questions, you'll find that there are literally dozens of copies of it from all other schools where students have uploaded their past exams. And so the end result is, if you really just need to get through school because you need a degree in order to get a job later, it may not be a moral question for you whether or not you're just going to Google something and get the right answer, get an A, and get out of there. And yes, it means that you're learning less. At the same time, how much do I really value the learning that could be done if I could just Google it and find out that the answer is the letter A? Just check off, option A and move on. And I don't want to suggest that that is extremely widespread, but I do want to say that students are under tremendous pressure, both financially in order to pay for school, as well as academically. If they don't get through school, they're not going to get a job. And the idea of failing an exam or failing a class means that you have to retake it. That's going to take time and money. And if the alternative is just to Google it, you're really, juxtaposing someone's professional future against a real quick lapse of academic integrity. I think it's actually really common. And so to talk back about alternatives of things, and I understand Todd was mentioning, one way of viewing the question is, what about the classes that have final exams? But I want to point out that I personally would really have preferred a program that asks me the kinds of questions that I can Google, I can research, and that I have to provide my own answer to. That Googling, A, B, C, or D, it wouldn't have helped. I would have liked to have given my own opinion as opposed to memorization a lot of the time.
Thanks very much, Jake. So we're approaching the 1 hour mark, and I want to make sure that we have time for everybody to give their short closing statement. If for whatever reason, if we do have a little bit of time to answer maybe a question or so, we might get to it. I don't think so. So if you want questions answered, some of the panelists have indicated that they're willing to answer them via email. Just maybe post them again with your email address and who you're directing your question at, and then we can field those questions offline later. So I wanted to ask everybody to give a quick closing statement now, having heard what they heard. And Jean, can we start with you?
Thanks, Paul. Well, I will stay with the definition of Todd about e-proctoring being a tool that it can be used within a wider context of a culture of academic integrity. Not as the one solution magical solution that will help to address all our academic integrity issues. So I think that we have a tool, we have to acknowledge the benefits or the advantages and disadvantages of using it, and then make a decision based on that analysis. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Jean. Todd, are you willing to go next?
Yeah, sure, for sure. And I would just echo what Jean has said. E-proctoring is a tool that we can use. It's not the end all and be all. It's not the answer for every solution, but it is a tool. To use the analogy of a carpenter has a hammer in his belt, and it's a necessary tool for him to do his job. You wouldn't want to give me a hammer to build your house, but you would want to put it in the hands of a trained carpenter to use it to build your house. So e-proctoring is a tool that needs to be used properly. A hammer can do serious damage, but a hammer can also be a very, very useful tool. So I see e-proctoring as a tool, as an option, not the be all and end all option, but definitely as a necessary tool that we can use to maintain academic integrity.
Thank you, Todd. Jake, are you willing to go next?
Sure, I apologize, just typing a message in the Q&A. I just want to say as an ending, I guess, challenge to any of the schools that are looking to use this e-proctoring software. I have asked this of multiple e-proctoring vendors. All have said no, but maybe you have a little bit more pull than I have. If you are of the belief that e-proctoring helps tremendously in cutting down cheating, I would like you to arrange with the e-proctoring software to give me a test. I will set up a camera, the webcam, obviously, in order to take the test, as well as a camera facing me from a different angle, so you can see exactly what I'm doing. I will cheat the entire way through the exam, and we'll see how much the software actually catches. And I can cheat in any number of ways, either the opportunistic method of cheating, or actually complex software, setting up different computers and that sort of a thing. And we'll see how much it really tests. And we can see whether or not the software is really detecting things that any student could do, if it's detecting something that a advanced or technologically advanced student could do, a determined student could do. I just want to point out that every one of the vendors has said no, they will not allow me to make any videos or post anything about how effective it actually is. Obviously, those vendors say that they're effective, but let's use the scientific method. Let's actually test this out and see if it works. And if they say no to the universities as well, that they don't want their software tested, I think that's kind of a black mark against them. You would certainly test drive a car before you sign a contract for it.
Thank you, Jake. And hopefully we can have some kind of a forum then to share insights along that way. Alicia, would you be willing to go next?
Sure. Thank you. I think to wrap up my thoughts on this, I would say that it definitely can be used as a tool. And again, with the careful consideration that I keep mentioning, and with the customization around the student experience and for particular students. But I think instead of just looking, but we definitely need to look at education, not just our systems and how we create assessments and what those assessments are even assessing for students, but also in education around academic integrity and the values that our institutions place on it. Something that McEwen has taken in an interest in and has explored and been using is through our restorative resolution. So students who are accused or have violated our academic integrity policy, that they can have the option of taking a restorative resolution where they actually get to actively reflect and come to constructive penalties for addressing those violations and actually understanding the harms that it comes from it. And this can maybe get to some of those questions that Jake pointed out, or some of the students that need to go into. And then I think this can also be reflected into those assessments that we do create around creating that awareness around academic integrity, and actually making sure that those are providing value to the students. Because yeah, we can just Google things on our phone all the time, or even in our careers. We will probably still have that option. So is that the best way to test students? I'm not sure. But I think overall creating education around not just other modes of learning, but then also academic integrity itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I'm noticing that we're just starting the conversation, and there's many, many aspects of this that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about today. And I'll close by picking up on something that both Jake and Jean have mentioned before, and that's research. Recently, a grad student and I published a rapid review looking at academic integrity and mental health concerns during the COVID-19 crisis. E-proctoring came up as the single most important factor regarding students' mental health. But having said that, we found a distressing lack of research about e-proctoring software, including its effects on student mental health. The lack of data is horrifying. And I'll emphasize that sales pitches are not data. We need more research conducted by scholars at universities that is funded, that is not funded by companies, that is funded by government grants and other grants to understand this so that we can make informed decisions about how we move forward with this.
Thank you, Sarah, for that passionate closing. I wanted to thank all the panelists today for their time and thoughtful comments. Especially wanted to thank the students on the panel, Alicia and Jake. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. I assume it's already the middle of the night for some of you out there. I also want to draw your attention to the weekly blogs that are posted on current topics on the International Center for Academic Integrity's website, as well as the upcoming annual conference, which will be held virtually March 1st to 4th, 2021, where I'm sure e-proctoring will be a hot topic. Thank you and goodbye. Have a good afternoon or day. Thank you.